Hello and welcome to our webcast of October 12, 2018. My name is Christian Debré and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet.
Hello.
Also, we have
Not
today, also we are not joining us, Taylor Ayat, our policy analyst and outreach coordinator.
Because she's at a conference in Pittsburgh.
So she's working.
Bye-bye.
Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disabilities. Today's topics, we have three topics. Pediatric euthanasia policies proposed. Second topics, Saskatchewan stops counting assisted euthanasia as suicide. And the third one, new guideline for disorder of consciousness. And to help us with all those three subjects, Amy Hasbrook.
Yeah. Okay, so this week we're going to do three assisted suicide and euthanasia policy issues to bring to your attention. On September 21st, researchers at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto published an essay in the British Journal of Medical Ethics.
A very serious journal.
Very serious, yes. Describing how they came to adopt new policies on euthanasia for young people. So they basically decided that they're convinced that euthanasia is going to be allowed for people who are under 18 years of age, and they are getting ready to do it. So they've made policies for how to do it.
Yeah, and you will see that it's not always easy.
Some of the policies are some of them are good, but some of them are a little odd. Though the policy can apply to adults, the working group seems to be expecting that the Council of Canadian Academies study, which is due out in December, will recommend that eligibility for euthanasia be extended to mature minors, meaning people under 18 years old. It would then be up to Parliament to change the law if they wish to.
We don't want to be part of it, but do it yourself.
Right.
Basically what it is.
Right. Well, in fact, that is the way it is, because the Council of Canadian Academies can make suggestions, but they can't change the law. So it's the Parliament who has to decide. And if the Parliament decides not to do anything, then it will still be only for people who are 18 years of age or older.
Yes.
Okay, so the policy focuses on the questions of whether allowing someone to die and causing someone to die are the same thing.
Which, to our own opinion, this is not at all
not the same thing.
No, the first one, you just wait for the death happening, and the second one, you kill.
Causing the death.
That's exact. It's obvious for us.
Right.
Okay? And nobody could really expect the exact time of the death, okay?
Right.
Doctors are reasonably good, but most of the time, they are not exactly right. And a lot of time, they are completely wrong.
Right.
We know people who have been said, you will die next morning, and they are still alive many years after.
Right, and they used this question as to whether causing and allowing someone to die are the same thing as the basis for developing their policy, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, and because the base is wrong, even if the logical build-up they do is perfect, the top is wrong. Why? Because the base is wrong.
Right. So the authors believe that if you focus on the patient, quote unquote, because we generally say the person, but if you focus on the patient rather than the doctor, the difference between allowing and causing death become irrelevant. Right.
No.
No. I don't think so. Well, we disagree, okay? Because both satisfy the primary goal of medical assistance in dying, which is to alleviate unendurable suffering.
And this is why it's false.
You know, it might be the primary goal, but the consequence of doing it is killing people. And that's not alleviating suffering. That's killing people. It's a different thing.
Okay.
Alleviating suffering is easing pain, providing mental health support, providing services in the community so people don't have to be stuck in institutions.
Giving enough money to have a normal life.
Right, exactly.
And things like that.
Those are, you know, relieving suffering. Killing is not relieving suffering. And
not really.
So the basis of their argument is, in our view, it's faulty. So yeah, that's just us. Let's see. So, and that just leaves the idea of killing the pain, not the person, out in the cold, which is a problem. The working group describes a 15-step process for assessment, approval, and administration of euthanasia. The proposed policy, in the proposed policy, the working group suggests that the conversation about assisted suicide and euthanasia should be started by the person making the request.
Look like a very nice thing.
Yes, okay. So that's a good idea. However, they note that this is diametrically opposed to the way virtually all other medical communication is structured. So what do you think is going to happen if the doctors are always telling people what their choices are? They're not going to suddenly do it a different way. So even though
nurses, doctor in an hospital, in any nursing home, they will do the same thing as they do every day for everybody. They will not change the slight thing, which is looking like a slight thing, just because there is a law somewhere. And at the end, what it will happen, the government will say, oh, everybody do it like that. We will legalize it. And so on, the slippery slope, who are really now really a cliff, will be more slippery.
Right. So it's not a law that they're proposing, but they're proposing a policy, and we don't believe that the policy will be enforceable because
kind of impossible. That's not the way it works in the hospital and in nursing home.
Right, and they kind of admit that too.
Yeah.
Also, the working group does not mention a suicide prevention. Though steps 6A and 7 mention medically appropriate treatment options, these are not listed. And it seems odd that they don't mention suicide prevention until you remember that assisted suicide and euthanasia are not considered suicide.
Oh.
And again, that's this practice of
wrong.
Twisting.
That's completely wrong. Why? Because any suicide is a suicide. That's very simple. Any suicide is a suicide. So there's no twisting, there's no flaw, there's no nothing. You say a suicide is a suicide. You allowed it or not, but it's a suicide.
Right. But, you know, they think that if they call it medical assistance in dying or aide médicale à mourir, then it suddenly becomes not suicide, but that's not correct.
But this is.
Right.
And family sometimes call my grandfather or my father commit a suicide in the hospital, or have received medical aid in dying. But they kind of mix those things together, which is not really what happened.
Right. And again, they're talking about the primary goal of MAID being to alleviate suffering, but they're thinking the only way to alleviate suffering is killing people. So,
which is not.
Again, okay, so the working group supports Ontario's presumption that a person is capable regardless of their age, which is okay. You know, that's one view. This follows the current policy of allowing people under 18 to make life and death decisions. but raises an important question. If teenagers' brains are unstable due to rapid growth and hormonal storms, and that instability can put them at risk for suicide, are adolescents really equipped to make thoughtful decisions about suicide and euthanasia?
And we know that happen in any adolescent.
Right.
We know that.
Right.
It's scientific proof everywhere. That's no different for a teenager who are sick. This is
Right.
exactly the same.
Right. Or who have disabilities or whatever.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's a pretty tempestuous time in the brains of people who are getting to be adults. And, you know, on the one hand, they're saying, oh, these people are so, you know, adolescents are so vulnerable to suicidal ideas. And on the other hand, they're saying, oh, they can make intelligent and considered decisions about whether or not they should kill themselves.
Do your mind. It's one way or the other, but
Right.
not both.
Right. And this is repeating Quebec. The new premier of Quebec wants to make cannabis only available to people who are 21 years of or older. But that doesn't make any sense because you can drink at 18. And
you could go to war at 17 if your parents sign up for you. And 18, no need of any permission, but you could go to war. But you are not allowed to get marijuana.
Yeah.
Oops.
So in Quebec, you can ask for assisted suicide or euthanasia. Well, actually, you can only ask for euthanasia in Quebec. So you can have euthanasia, but you can't smoke pot. That's kind of weird.
Completely off.
Yeah.
Completely.
Okay. The working group also presents conflicting information about whether people can appeal a finding of ineligibility due to incapacity to Ontario's Consent and Capacity Board. And we actually spent quite too much time looking for the answer to that question because the essay throws it into doubt, and yet in another place it says you can do it. And we looked and we couldn't find anything that confirmed whether in fact you can appeal. So it was unclear. And it was a little surprising that they had something that important be left up to so much doubt.
Yeah.
Also, the working group allows young people to be, the proposal would allow young people to be euthanized without their parents' knowledge or consent. And you know, that's very controversial.
In some case, it could be a nice thing.
Right.
In other case, it could be very bad thing.
Right. It's very controversial. There are reasons it could work or reasons it should be used, but though adolescents are encouraged to inform their parents, they are not required to do so. And this contradicts the hospital's own recommendation for suicide prevention among adolescents. So in a situation where the kid has gotten the message since day one that their disability is tragic and horrible and strains the family, you know, I can understand why, or if the parents have been abusive, I can understand why the kid would not want to communicate with the parents. The only problem is, you know, then the kid's making a choice that's not really free and clear and competent. It's influenced by the parents' feelings, and that's a big problem.
It is a big problem.
Right. And that's one of the last pieces, is that the policy fails to take into account the role of disability discrimination in creating a negative self-image. The policy also doesn't compensate for the impact of the age and power imbalance between adult medical personnel and minor children, or the role of learned compliance in institutional settings in discussing treatment options. So you're a disabled person and you've always been taught to just cooperate and go along with whatever they're doing to you. And all of a sudden they say, oh, but you need to make this choice.
Yeah.
And yet the doctors and the parents are all, voicing their opinions, not openly, of course, but you feel like you're supposed to read their minds, decide what they're wanting, because that's how kids are. Kids are sensitive and they want to do what parents and other
Normally
people
they
want.
love their parents, so they try to agree with their parents.
Right, exactly. So, but this policy doesn't take any of that into account. It really doesn't, and they're acting like these kids are completely separate from those kinds of influences, and that's silly. And finally, the policy ignores the fact that more parents request assisted suicide for their children than do children ask for it for themselves. Again, how can you come up with a policy that's supposed to serve in the real world when you're ignoring what's going on in the real world? And, we put a reference in the text to the study that showed that. The Canadian Pediatric Society published that earlier this year. And, they're acting like it's not, it doesn't exist. And that tells us that parents are putting pressure on doctors, asking doctors about euthanasia for their kids. So I don't know.
It's a bad idea. That's it. It's a bad idea.
Right. The whole idea. Anyway. Okay, our second topic is Saskatchewan stops counting assisted suicide and euthanasia as suicide. The province of Saskatchewan has stopped counting assisted suicide and euthanasia deaths as suicide, which require a coroner's investigation. So it's automatic. It was automatic that a coroner would investigate. And that was a good thing because we know how often, in Quebec, for example, we know that people were killed who were not eligible for euthanasia.
And it's not us who tell it.
Right.
It is the official report of the Committee of Surveillance. Okay?
On end-of-life care, yeah.
Okay. And they say there was three
cases.
3 cases of manslaughter. What is the term in English?
Homicide.
Homicide, the same thing. Okay. Homicide. 3 homicide. Proof homicide.
Right.
Okay. Because remember, it's an exception. Assisted suicide and euthanasia is an exception of the law over homicide. And if you are outside, it is an homicide.
Right.
And there is 3 proofs homicide, and nobody have take any notice of it except the report. And there was no inquiry, there is no suit, there's no nothing about it.
Right. So Saskatchewan used to have a way to automatically investigate them, but they've stopped doing that. They will now be recorded as unclassified deaths on the medical certificate of death.
Even it's a very, very classified death,
Right.
that is
Unclassified.
assisted suicide
Right.
or euthanasia.
Right. And the medical certificate of death is not to be confused with the death certificate, which is a separate document used for legal proof that the person is dead.
The one that you give to the undertaker and insurance and things like that.
Yeah. But the medical certificate of death is what indicates the cause of death. And they're saying that, suicide is not the cause of death, so that people can collect on insurance, and so that there's no stigma and blah, blah, blah.
And the stigma is sometimes more, not a lot of time more important than insurance itself.
Right. Okay, so Clive Whale, who is the chief coroner for the province, has said his office will investigate any death, quote, if somebody thinks it is sudden, unexpected, unnatural, or unexplained, unquote, implying that an autopsy must be requested. In the case of assisted suicide and euthanasia, that would include claims of coercion or an improper procedure. Wayhill said that, to his knowledge, this has never happened in Saskatchewan. So the journalist who wrote that article had a hard time understanding his response because his head was buried in the sand.
Probably.
Of course, there are cases where, you know, there might not be cases of euthanasia yet that have come to light, but there are certainly cases where people are killed or helped to die to, you know, for financial gains of relatives. That's absolutely the case. That's happened.
People receive pressure, and it's a kind of how the life works, okay? And if you receive
it's not
pressure,
a good thing.
no, but
it's
happened.
Very common.
Yeah, it happened a lot of time. You just have to look at the newspaper every week. There is old people who are molested one way or another, and those same people ask for assisted suicide or euthanasia, and they say, yes, you will be allowed. Hey!
Right.
Not supposed to.
And, you know, I was looking to see if there had been any cases in Saskatchewan. No, not in Saskatchewan, but I found a couple cases outside of Saskatchewan.
Yeah. So Saskatchewanese people are completely different than all people around the world.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
They are better. Be sure.
Yeah. Okay, and as we noted last month, does not have the resources, the motivation, or the expertise necessary to look into these cases.
And even no budget at all. Nobody
resources,
in no place in Canada have put a dime on the budget for looking at what happened.
Right, exactly. Okay, so the last topic is new guidelines for disorders of consciousness. The American Academy of Neurology released new guidelines for doctors treating disorders of consciousness, or DOC, caused by traumatic brain injuries or oxygen deprivation. The document emphasized the importance of periodic retesting for by qualified neurologists using tools recommended by the Academy of Neurology and the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine. They also recommend using functional magnetic resonance imaging and making sure the person is as awake as possible when they're tested.
Yeah, because if they are sleeping and not dreaming at the time, anybody, including yourself, will be kind of flat.
Right, and even people in comas and you know, minimally conscious states, vegetative states, whatever, have sleeping and waking cycles. And if you don't bring the person to their awake cycle and you test them for consciousness, of course.
If they're sleeping and you ask a question, you will never have any question.
That happens all the time. I talk to him, I ask him questions.
I couldn't remember anything. Anything.
Right.
When I start sleeping at the beginning, you could do anything. I will not awake and I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, it takes a lot to wake him up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. They also emphasized the need for rehabilitation services and stimulation, either at a rehabilitation facility or at home. So let's not warehouse these people in nursing homes or institutions. People need to have rehabilitation stimulation. And that was the case. There was a case back in the 80s of a woman named, Karen Thompson was her partner, and her name has slipped my mind now. Oh, well. They were partners, and the woman, Sharon Kowalski. Sharon Kowalski was injured in a car accident, and she had a brain injury, and her parents refused to let her partner, Karen Thompson, be with her and take care of her, and their parents stuck her in a nursing home where she wasn't getting any rehab care. And eventually, Karen finally won the right to take care of Sharon and put her in rehab, got stimulation, and lo and behold, she recovered consciousness and was able to start functioning. And she wasn't, quote unquote, normal, but she was conscious and participating in her life. So, you know, that's the importance of rehabilitation.
Very important.
Right. So the other thing they emphasized is avoiding statements that suggest a universally poor prognosis when talking to the family. The word tragic ought to be eliminated from the dictionary because it is so destructive.
At least for medical dictionary.
Right. It's so destructive for people with disabilities, and doctors should not be allowed to use it. Nobody should be allowed to use it. But they're so common, oh, this is going to be a terrible loss, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's a loss, but when you say it's like the end of their existence, that kind of,
if the person is changed, doesn't mean the person doesn't exist anymore.
Right, exactly. They also emphasize the fact that since many people with non-traumatic disorders of consciousness recover consciousness after 3 months, and others with traumatic DOC wake up after 12 months, the authors suggest applying the term chronic unresponsive wakefulness state, or UWS, rather than persistent vegetative state.
Yeah, because the people still the people.
Right. So they're awake, but they're unresponsive. And that gives you a clue to what happens when you use magnetic resonance imaging, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to determine whether the person is present, because they've done experiments now on 20% of the people who were quote unquote in persistent vegetative states actually were able to respond using fMRI.
Yes or no. And why?
Yeah.
Because we know where it is in our brain.
Right.
And if you look.
Well, what they did is they said, if you want to say yes, imagine playing tennis. If you want to say no, imagine walking through rooms in your house. And the difference between what signals would come out of the fMRI was consistent with correct answers to the yes or no questions that the people were being asked.
So they understand.
They were there. They
are present, but they could not
respond
externally.
So that's why they call it an unresponsive wakefulness. So they're awake, but they can't respond. It's not the same thing as vegetative. Okay, and they also suggest that these benchmarks, the 3 months if it's a traumatic brain injury and the 12 months if it's a non-traumatic brain injury, should not be used as a signal to withdraw life support.
It's not a switch at midnight at the end of the day.
Right. It's not, oh, well, your 3 months are up. We're gonna pull the plug. Yeah, no, this is, they're talking about the unresponsive wakefulness state is a chronic disability. And that's a very different way of thinking about it. And I think it's really important for people to try to grab onto that it's a chronic disability. It needs to be treated as such. Okay. Doctors often rush to judgment about people's ability to recover from brain injuries and what that recovery should look like. When Not Dead Yet in the US wrote about the new AAN standards in its blog, NDY referenced the story of a little boy whose life support was nearly removed just 6 weeks after a non-traumatic brain injury as an example of this rush to judgment. And it's
you know why?
Only one example.
You know why? He recovered.
Right. And sometimes the decision to withdraw life support is rooted in fear of the disability caused by brain injury. The family devalues the loved one's disabled life rather than taking the time and support they need to adjust. And that's what happened in Sharon Kowalski's case. The family just stuck her in a nursing home. They didn't try to rehabilitate her. And that was part of the reason Karen Thompson was so angry, because not only could she not see her partner, her spouse, they had actually exchanged rings, but the parents were giving up on her, were devaluing her disabled life. And so the difference was very important.
Yes.
As well, The continued use of the term vegetative state is dehumanizing. No person can ever lose their humanity.
We never lose our humanity.
We do not become broccoli.
No.
No.
We love broccoli. We like broccoli, but
well,
we are not.
You don't like broccoli.
No,
I love.
She likes broccoli, but I tolerate broccoli.
Yeah, he tolerates broccoli, but we are not broccoli. Okay, we hope the medical professionals will follow these new standards rather than cutting lives short because people weren't given the time they need to heal. And we put that up on our Facebook page, that post from Not Dead Yet, and there's actually a video that goes along with it that talks about how the fMRI was used to communicate with people. So pretty interesting stuff. Okie dokie. If you have any questions about the topics that we discuss here, you can reach us via our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet, all one word. Visit our website at tvndy.ca, and we're about to unveil our new remodeled website. You can email us at sign-mdy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter at @TVNDY. Thanks to Christiane for helping out.
Thank you, Amy.
And we will see you next time.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.